In just 2 weeks, the Chinese Central Committee Political Bureau will convene the 20th Communist Party of China National Congress in Beijing. President Xi Jinping is expected to secure an unprecedented third leadership term, establishing himself as the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao Zedong. President Xi, who assumed office in November of 2012, has steadily worked over his tenure to increase the power of the Chinese Communist Party and stifle any voices of dissent. Tonight, we are joined by one of those voices of dissent, Dr. Teng Biao. Dr. Teng is an attorney who has taken on some of the most difficult human rights cases in China. He has advocated for the rights of migrant workers, as well as ethnic and religious minorities. As a result of his work, he has been arrested, kidnapped, tortured, and ultimately forced into. He joins us this evening to discuss the state of human rights in China and to discuss what high-tech surveillance looks like for ordinary Chinese civilians. Dr. Teng is a Hauser Human Rights Scholar at Hunter College, the City University of New York, and a Posen Visiting Professor at the University of Chicago. He has served as a visiting professor at Yale, Harvard, and New York University Law Schools, and he was one of the earliest promoters of the rights defense movement in China and the Manifesto Charter 8, for which Dr. Liu Xiaobo was awarded the 2010 Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. Teng will share brief remarks, and then he will be joined in conversation by Ronan O'Malley. Ronan is the Director of Programs for the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston, where he oversees the large variety of speakers and events hosted by the Council. He also teaches continuing education classes at the Council on global affairs and U.S. foreign policy. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Teng Biao and Ronan O'Malley.
Introduction. Thank you all for coming to this event. On February 19th, 2011, I was kidnapped by 4 Chinese secret police. I was covered by a hood and taken to a black jail. I didn't know where I was detained. I was beaten and put under extreme form of solitary confinement. I was not allowed to read, to write, to communicate with my family, my lawyers. So for my family, I was totally disappeared, and I was forced to sit down on the floor facing the wall from early morning to midnight, and I was put forced to wear a handcuff 24/7, lasting 70 days. But before I went to university in Beijing, I was kind of brainwashed. I believed in everything that the textbooks, the teachers told me. I was not able to challenge everything of the propaganda. I didn't have any chance to access to the information, censored by the Chinese government. But when I came to the university, I gradually realized I had been cheated by the Chinese Communist Party for so long time. I read some underground books, and I met a few scholars and professors who encouraged me to think independently and critically. And then I decided to become a human rights lawyer to promote human rights and rule of law in China. So after 2003, I joined the human rights movement. I was one of the earliest promoters of the Uighur movement, the rights defense movement. So we took human rights cases related to freedom of expression, religious freedom, like forced eviction. We provided legal assistance to the victims of wrongful convictions, torture, and religious persecution. We also encourage the citizens to to participate in the local elections as independent candidate. And I also helped Dr. Liu Xiaobo to draft the Charter 08 and collect signatures. And then I, because of my human rights work, I was disbarred. I was banned from teaching and eventually fired by the university I was teaching at. And I was put under house arrest from time to time, and I was kidnapped, detained, and tortured. I think the human rights situation in China is deteriorating very rapidly after Xi Jinping came to power. So before that, human rights lawyers and activists were detained and convicted and tortured. But after that, the situation has been worse and worse. Xi Jinping targeted not only human rights lawyers and dissidents, but also scholars, journalists, bloggers, and churches and all kind of religious groups and Hong Kongers, Tibetans and Uighurs. We know the Uighur genocide actually is the worst humanitarian disaster for our time, and up to 2 or 3 million Uighurs and Kazakhs and other Turkic people are detained in concentration camps. So the Communist Party has been using the high technology to tighten its control on society and individuals. So I coined the term the high-tech totalitarianism. They use the DNA collections, facial recognition, voice print recognition, and like a gait recognition that they can identify you through how you walk or run, and that's very very powerful, very effective. This kind of high-tech totalitarianism is unprecedented. And I can give you one recent case. Is that 2 human rights lawyers planned to go to Shanghai to meet their clients, actually a citizen journalist who was jailed for her report of the coronavirus. And suddenly the health code of the human rights lawyers turned red, and they were not allowed to leave their home. So you can see the Communist Party is using the technologies supposed to be deal with the coronavirus to tighten the control on individuals, especially the dissidents and the human rights activists. So the most and at the same time the brainwashing and the propaganda become more effective, and also the nationalist sentiment is incited by the Communist Party. So the most horrible autocracy is not the one that suppresses resistance, but the one that makes you feel that it's unnecessary to resist, or even makes you defend the regime. So that's really a terrifying scenario of the high-tech totalitarianism. And when I left China in 2014, my wife and one of my children were put on the blacklist. They were prevented from leaving China. So apparently, my family members were used by the Chinese government as hostages to punish me and to silence me. But I continue my human rights work, and I think it's my moral obligation to be a voice of the voiceless and the powerless in China, and the liberal democracy should not be taken for granted. If we don't care about it, if we don't defend it, if we don't examine it, it will be eroded weakened or even destroyed. So I will support the resistance in China, in North Korea, Iran, Russia, and elsewhere in the world. I hope you can join the beautiful fight too. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you all very much for coming, and thank you so much to Asia Society Texas and Matt and Selena and everyone else here helping you. And Dr. Teng, I just want to say I'm truly honored and I feel privileged to host you. We've been in contact for a good few months. In my time at the council, I've had the great fortune to host some incredible people, high-level speakers that people are impressed by, but the people I'm most impressed by and have the greatest respect for are people like yourself. You have such incredible courage and dedication. You touched upon the degree of surveillance and the human rights scenario in China, and we'll get back to that. But I think maybe it's also important for people to realize the long and kind of dire and frightening shadow of the Chinese Communist Party is wielded well outside of China's borders. Can you just talk briefly about the years that you have been in the United States? Maybe on the quote-unquote lighter side, there's the soft power ability of the Communist Party to kind of influence economically or other ways for, denying student visas, that they've affected your career. For instance, maybe two topics you can talk about. You had a program scheduled to be hosted at Harvard that was canceled. You also had something similar with the American Bar Association, and it was also canceled because of Chinese pressure. Can you talk about how that shadow of the Chinese Party still follows you here and other dissidents in the United States?
Sure. So my focus, my research, usually focus on human rights violations and political system in China. But I'm writing a book on how Chinese government threatens freedom and human rights globally. I can give you a lot of cases, but as you mentioned, the American Bar Association invited me to write a book about my experience and as a human rights lawyer and dissident, and then they rescinded the agreement to publish my book, and they told me they don't want their programs in China being jeopardized by publishing my book, and Harvard, I had a scheduled talk canceled by Harvard University. The reason is that the time I was supposed to talk at Harvard was when Harvard president was visiting in Beijing and meeting with Xi Jinping. So they told me it's not a good timing, and they wanted to invite me later, something like that. And there are a lot of such cases, and sometimes the CSSA, Chinese Students and Scholars Associations, they protest against these events. So one of their functions is to prevent people like me to be invited, the sensitive topics like Tiananmen, Uyghurs, Tibetan, these issues being discussed. So that's China's long arm and China's increasing threat to academic freedom, free speech, and even personal freedom in the United States and other countries. One more case is some human rights activists and dissidents were even physically assaulted because of their work, because of the criticized Chinese Communist Party. And one of them happened in Atlanta and one in San Francisco.
And we've discussed a little bit of what Chinese dissidents face once in exile, even in the United States or Canada or Europe or South Korea or wherever. But can you talk about a little bit, even just ordinary Chinese students who are studying abroad or studying in the United States, what's the level of surveillance and what they face, let alone if a student actually wanted to take your class, they realize that could be a big black mark as a Chinese student to take your class, or even a non-Chinese student who might want to study later in China. to have that on their kind of resume, so to speak, it puts them in a difficult situation.
Yeah, so I mentioned CSSA, but there are many other organizations like the Tongxianghui, the Townsmen Association, the people, Chinese people from same city in mainland China, and alumni associations, Chamber of Commerce. Many such organizations are sponsored and sometimes controlled by the Chinese consulate, Chinese embassy, and sometimes by, you may have heard of United Frontwork, and they monitor Chinese students, Chinese scholars, and other people in the diaspora community. And the Chinese students, I teach at a couple of universities, and sometimes they are not to register my class, and not only Chinese students, but one case I was teaching at University of Chicago, and one American student, American citizen, told me she has to drop the class because she will go to China to be an intern like that. And when I gave a talk like this, some Chinese students can't come. They are afraid of showing up, and if they show up, and even if especially if they ask question critical of the Chinese government, and they'll be reported to the Chinese embassy like that.
And then to turn it kind of, unfortunately, more sinister and kind of darker aspects of it, I know you still receive death threats, unfortunately, as do some of your fellow dissidents. And some of the headlines people may have read, or familiarity you might have with you, it's probably wondering what in the world's happening. It's confusing. There's a quote-unquote Chinese billionaire, even though people don't know how exactly he made his money, who claims to be a rabid anti-communist and vitriol throwing against the Communist Party. But at the same time, he's also rallied, who knows who they are exactly, there's beliefs that their people are paid to harass and protest and even harass outside your own house, in front, your wife and your family and your kids and others. And probably even more unusual, this guy now has an alliance with Steve Bannon, kind of a well-known U.S. extreme nationalist at best. And what is the state of dissidents in the United States right now?
So that story is kind of complicated. But it's a good example that Chinese dissidents and together with the Hong Kong Tibetan activists, Uighur activists, we don't feel safe even in the United States. And as I mentioned, these people were physically harassed and assaulted in the United States, in Argentina, in France, in Asia, many other countries. And that guy named Guo Wengui, or Max Guo, he became super rich because he had very close connection with a person named Ma Jian, who was the Vice Minister of MSS, Ministry of State Security, and so the spy organ in China. And he had Ma Jian and other protectors, and they helped him to develop his business. And then Ma Jian, for political reasons, was arrested, and Guo Wengui lost his protector, his umbrella, and then he came to the United States. But it's ridiculous. He pretended to be a dissident, a whistleblower. He said he will expose the corruption of top communist leaders. But I should be happy if somebody exposes the corruption details of the top Chinese officials. But almost everything he said can't be verified, and many of his statements can be easily proven wrong. So he's a fake dissident, And I criticize him. Of course, he just wanted to use that so-called whistleblower revolution to cheat people after money. So over the years, he cheated more than $400 million. And I'm in the way of his fraudulent scheme. So he started a global harassment campaign, and he sent his supporters to stand in front of my house and filming from morning to evening and harass me for 2 months. He sued me for defamation. So I think it's part of the long arm of the Chinese Communist Party. He works for. He used to work for the spy organ, MSS, and he never denied that. He talked about that. He's proud of that, and he might be still working for Chinese spy organ.
And just briefly, because it's so odd, and then is there any way to explain what's the connection to Steve Bannon, which most people would be like, how in the world does that happen?
So Guo Hongui had a contract with Steve Bannon, and so hired him as a advisor or something, and Steve Bannon got at least $1 million. So Guo Hongui has close connection with not only Steve Bannon but also Giuliani and Peter Navarro. Kind of that, and there have been quite a few reports about the role of Guo Hongui in the disinformation campaign, and not only during the presidential election in 2020, but also like vaccination, the coronavirus. He played a key role in those conspiracy theories and rumors.
And turning back to China, like you said, you mentioned, you kind of coined the term high-tech authoritarianism. Can you talk a little bit more on how exactly the Communist Party uses technology to surveil their citizens, everything from having millions of facial recognition cameras around the country to tracking all internet traffic online, and maybe you could even just talk about the social credit system and the many things they do to surveil the people and I suppose kind of keep them in line.
Right. I think you have read the George Orwell's 1984. So what's happening in China has surpassed this imagination of George Orwell, and China has more than 2.8 billion surveillance cameras. Every Chinese has 2, and the social credit systems, and so you don't have any privacy in China, and they can identify you. They can locate you very quickly. And a British journalist made a test. So 7 minutes, he was caught. The cameras and the artificial intelligence, all that kind of stuff. And the health code. So there are the different codes. So if you want to go after your home, you have to take with those health code and other like a travel code and location code, and it's an effective tool for the Communist Party to monitor everyone. And of course it's not only for the purpose of dealing coronavirus. It's a perfect excuse for the party to use the health code and other public health tools to follow and to monitor everyone. And through the nearly 3 years management of coronavirus, the Communist Party has strengthened its high-tech totalitarian surveillance.
And sadly, maybe you could touch upon the fact that a certain amount of this technology, especially some of the artificial intelligence, some of that's come from American firms that may not have known how it was being used at first, but even once they did know, they did not necessarily step back or withdraw themselves because they didn't want to lose access to the American market. But could you talk about kind of the West's role in creating a surveillance state inside of China?
Yes, I've written a report about how the Western enterprises being complicit in China's censorship and the surveillance system. And one case is like the tax act, like Cisco and other tech companies provide technology and equipment and trainings to Chinese government to build the GFW, Great Firewall, and so without their technologies, it's difficult for the party to have this effective censorship system. And there are many such cases, and one case is even worse. Like Yahoo provided its clients' information to Chinese state security, and that led at least 4 Chinese bloggers dissident in jail, and they were sentenced to 10 years and 8 years. So upon the request of the Ministry of State Security, Yahoo gave its clients' information like email address, and so that's and then some people in Congress were very angry, and they had a congressional hearing, and Yahoo had to give amount of money for compensation of the jailed writers and the bloggers.
And as a human rights attorney, you worked with a very wide variety of repressed individuals and repressed people as well. But in recent years, in terms of the deepest degree of repression and surveillance, it's been in Xinjiang with the Uighur minorities. I think you told me you lived there for about a year and a half. What I find frightening is the artificial recognition cameras, maybe you can talk about a bit more. They don't just have the ability to recognize so-and-so, John Smith got off the train, or Susan Jones just got off an airplane. The technology has advanced so much that if they have a camera in Beijing or other large city far away from Xinjiang, that they have it programmed to say this person's facial structure has the racial facial structure potentially of someone who's Uyghur, who's not a Han Chinese or another group. Can you talk about that level of dystopia, that even if you're just a person under the radar, the fact that you might look like a minority of suspicion, you're going to be identified?
Exactly. That's the digital dystopia. It's in China. It's in not only in Xinjiang, aka East Turkestan, and some American companies involved in that technology, and they help Chinese government to advance the facial recognition, and they can identify the non-Han, especially Uyghur and Hazara people. So they look different with Han Chinese people. Like more than 90% of Chinese population are Han Chinese, but they have technologies to identify Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities, they know the genocide is happening in China, and Uyghurs are in the concentration camps, and for those Uyghurs who are not in the camps, they are severely monitored, and even more than 1 million Han Chinese government officials are staying at Uyghurs' home. To closely monitor them and to report their speech, their activities, their thoughts. and you know, a couple of years ago, the Hollywood movie Mulan. So that movie was greatly filmed in Xinjiang, and a few miles, 4 miles next to a concentration camp. And at the end of the movie, they thanked the Xinjiang Public Security Bureau, so we should be responsible for the concentration camps and the genocide. Yeah, so and we campaign for the boycott of this movie, but that's just one of the many examples of how the global companies, the business prioritize money, profit over human rights and freedom over principle.
Matt mentioned in the opening, in a few weeks we'll have the 20th Party Congress, a significant event, a lot of propaganda and high theater. It only happens every 5 years. There's no doubt that President Xi will be anointed basically to a third term after the Constitution was changed a few years ago. Can you talk about how, do you think, besides just himself, that those around him, that there's this idea of making Xi out to be the new Mao? That, you know, obviously it may not be 3 terms, it might be 15 years, it might be 20, it might be 25, but how the entire, really, his own bio and background is being changed sometimes to make him more heroic, more incredible, you know, more dedicated at a young age to China. If you talk about this complete myth-making behind, you know, turning Xi into something he never was, you know, not that long ago.
Maybe you have known that after Mao Zedong, we had Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, and Hu Jintao. I wrote that it's kind of a small group dictatorship. China, since 1949, China has been always a one-party system, a totalitarian system. But Deng, Jiang, and Hu era is like a small group dictatorship. And then Xi Jinping came to power in 2012, and then he turned that small group dictatorship into a personal, a one-man dictatorship. And in 2018, he removed the presidential term limit from the constitution, and he wants to be the permanent general secretary and president. Like in 9 days, 10 days, he will be elected as a party secretary, and he will start his 3rd term, and it's likely he will continue his power, and he wants to be a 4th term, maybe 5th. So that one point is a couple of years after Xi Jinping became the party secretary, I wrote an article. So according to my analysis, maybe many people don't agree, but it's not only about Xi Jinping himself. Xi Jinping has greatly changed China's political and social landscape, but I think it's to a certain extent, it's a collective of the Communist Party. When Xi Jinping came to power, it's like 2013, 2012, the Communist Party was facing a comprehensive crisis, like a political crisis, the social, environmental crisis, and ideological crisis, especially the economic crisis. And they have exaggerated concern of color revolution. So since 1989, the Tiananmen democracy movement, the Tiananmen massacre, the Communist Party was so worried about the possible color revolution. And the number one, when we talk about the Chinese politics, the number one rule we should bear in mind is the number one priority of the Communist Party is to maintain its power, maintain its one party rule, and then there was increasing influence of the civil society. As I mentioned, the group of lawyers promoted human rights and rule of law in China, and it's joined by journalists, the bloggers, and NGOs, house churches, and then that's part of the unintended consequences of the market economy and internet development in China. So when facing this crisis, for the Communist Party, the best choice is to choose one person, one strongman to react actively. So that so when Xi Jinping has the third term or fourth term, he will not change the current policy, tightening its control on society and individuals. So this kind of high-tech totalitarianism will continue, and the human rights situation will not be better.
Obviously, without a doubt, yes. After Mao and Deng Xiaoping, and the last 30, 40 years, China has arguably had the most incredible economic growth of any country or people in world history, especially on such an incredible scale. For many, many years, averaging 10% growth every single year. You touched upon it when Xi came to power about 10 years ago, that there were economic concerns. China's economy is still relatively strong, but it's not growing at 10% anymore. But how concerned do you think the Chinese Communist Party is that if the economy starts to slow down even more, that the promises they've been making to the population and the growth of the middle class slows down, that it's a real threat to the regime?
So one point not directly related to your question is the shadow. I've written an article that the shadow of the China miracle. So we see the China miracle. China has become the second largest economy in 2011, and in terms of PPP, purchase power parity. China has become the number one economy. But the shadow is behind the miracle is first the inequality. China is not only the least free country, one of the least free countries, but also one of the least equal countries, and the gap between the rich and the poor is huge. And then the corruption and the social decay and the human rights violations and the suppression of freedom and this kind of economic growth empowered the government. So China is not the richest country, but its government is the richest. The technologies, the money, and the Communist Party becomes very, very powerful and aggressive, and it has become a threat to not only Chinese people but to the rule-based international order. So back to your question, the economic growth. So almost all experts will predict the China is not able to keep its so fast economic growth, and when it has economic problem, it's not only an economic one. It's like in a country like China. It always has a problem of political legitimacy. That means the why people obey your order, why people obey the government. if there's no freedom, there's no free and meaningful election. So one thing is one of the most important things for the so-called legitimacy is performance legitimacy, and that so the rule of the Communist Party relies on its economic growth. When there's economic problems or even a crisis, and then it will bring up political crisis. So that will, I think that it's really hard to be hopeful when we see the Chinese politics in a foreseeable future. But this is something we should observe closely. The economic crisis we have seen a lot of cases. The bankruptcy, the stock market bubble,
if any of you have any questions, we have two options. We have those question cards, and my colleagues might pass around. Some of you might prefer writing a question instead of standing in front of a bunch of strangers. That's fine. Or if you feel comfortable using a microphone, we have that option as well. And I'll just kind of ask one more question. I'd love to turn it over to the audience. And in case I forget at the end, and I might, if any of you are interested, next week we're hosting someone who knows the Chinese and worked with them a good amount in the United Nations, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, on October 11th, and then someone else who's very familiar with China and their capabilities, especially in terms of the military intelligence. On November 9th, we're hosting the former CIA Director John Brennan. So we'd love to have any of you join us at those events. Lastly, I know you're not a military ex-analyst or expert, and it's very, very hard to predict and analyze what may or may not happen. You talk to people in intelligence, they'll say knowing what's happening in the inner circles of the Chinese Communist Party is one of the hardest places to get real, decent, reliable intelligence. But what are your perceptions with regards to China's potential, whether it be a small potential, a large potential, of actually militarily attacking or invading Taiwan? And do you think the last 6-7 months of the Ukraine war has changed any of that calculus?
Yes. So first, most Chinese people are brainwashed, as I was brainwashed before I was 18 years old, and they believe Taiwan, not only Taiwan, but Hong Kong, Tibet, East Turkestan, always, and the whole South China Sea are always part of China. And there's nationalism sentiment, and many people are like crazy, and they want to be soldiers when invading Taiwan. So and one of the considerations, Xi Jinping justify his third term. One of the reasons is Taiwan issue, and he kind of said that he needs more time to take back Taiwan, and that's why he needs a third term or even longer. So it was quite likely that Xi Jinping would start a war against Taiwan. But then in late February this year, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and unlike Putin, Xi Jinping, and those people predicted the war was not successful, was not as smooth as they imagined, and we see the whole world, the United States, the European countries are so supportive for Ukraine, and then it's not likely for Putin to win the war. And I think that and Xi Jinping is maybe the person who monitors the war closely, that will change his consideration. And but he still wants to invade Taiwan. One of the most important things is the United States and its allies must send a clear message to Chinese leaders that United States will not give up Taiwan. As President Biden repeatedly said that 4 times when being asked about the American reaction when Taiwan is invaded, Biden said he will defend Taiwan. He will send American men and women to protect Taiwan. Kind of that. So that's a clear message. Even though afterwards the White House said the China policy has not been changed like that, but Biden's message is clear. So it's very important to send this message to Chinese government to deter the invasion.
I don't know if we want to put up the house lights or anything to see. I can't tell if there's anyone out there who's got a question over there. Yeah, go ahead, please. Sure.
Let's see. Hello. Yeah. Given all of the issues which are great concerns in China, and the fact, on the other hand, that China is the other major superpower in terms of population, economy, and everything else, how do you balance that? If you were a decision maker in the United States, would you say China's bad, therefore we cannot have anything to do with it, or do you engage China in hoping to change China, reform China?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. China is a superpower, and the United States, the world, kind of rely on China. So we need China to deal with many issues like climate change, counterterrorism, nuclear. But for many decades since President Nixon's visit to China, there was an engagement policy, and many people, most scholars, policy makers assume that through that engagement, that China's entry to the World Trade Organization and that China engaged in international legal system and educational exchange, kind of that. And through that, especially economic liberalization, China would achieve eventually political liberalization. China will become a democracy if that market economy is increasing and gaining influence. But that didn't happen. China is not going towards democracy, but the opposite is more and more totalitarian. So I'm not opposing the engagement. What I propose is like a principled engagement. So under the name of engagement, as I mentioned, many governments, many companies, they prioritize profit over principles, and they want to do business. They don't want to anger the Chinese government, and they even cooperate with Chinese government in censorship technologies like that. And that's not engagement. That's appeasement. So what I propose is like a principled engagement. We should put the human rights issues, like democratization, as an important issue in the political agenda, So under that engagement, that appeasement, China has become a threat to international order, and that's a wrong direction.
Any other questions out there?
So I have 2 questions, if it's fine. My first question, it seems like within the party, there are some other voices not quite aligned with Xi's, like the Prime Minister Li Keqiang has been saying something not really aligned with Xi's, which gives people hope sometimes, right? So I'm wondering, from your point of view, what's a possibility that the power shift for good, right? The power shift or power dreadful whatever could happen within the party? That's my first question. My second question is that do you see hope for your people, for China and the Chinese people? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So there are a lot of rumors recently that Xi Jinping was under house arrest and Li Keqiang might be the next leader. Yeah. So that reflects people's hope. People are so eager to see the step down of Xi Jinping, and they're so angry at Xi Jinping. And I believe that Chinese people and the government officials, even top leaders, are many of them, some of them at least, are not happy with Xi Jinping and they hate Xi Jinping. But they are not able to challenge Xi Jinping's personal power. And even they have different ideas of with Xi Jinping. The attitude to Russia and how to deal with the pandemic. They have different ideas, and Xi Jinping's policies are kind of crazy. But they share the same interests too. And Li Keqiang, Wang Yang, some people may have open mind, and they want kind of limited reform maybe, but they don't want to see a free and democratic China. They want to maintain and prolong the one-party rule. So Li Keqiang is kind of softer than Xi Jinping. If he is the next leader, and then the Chinese people will suffer less. But that's it. They are not like a Gorbachev. They don't want any. They will not make any effort to push forward China towards meaningful democracy or rule of law or like human rights. And they hope. One thing is the economic crisis. Everyone. So there are people, Chinese people like me, in China and overseas, promoting liberal democracy in China. But it seems that China has lost its opportunity to see a peaceful transition, and it will be difficult. It's very hard to be smooth transition like what we have seen in Taiwan, in South Korea, like Czechoslovakia. It's not likely, but the economic issue is something that will impact the political system very much. And another thing is the international geopolitics. The United States and European countries, the democratic countries have realized the previous policy toward China was not working, and they need a new China policy. And we see the relation between China and United States have been profoundly changed, and it seems no turning back.
And I guess if we just maybe do just two, I think maybe time for two quick questions, audience. I'll just read this one quick written question. It's a very interesting one as well. I don't want to keep you all. And Robert asked an interesting question. Can you talk a bit about how China's largely cashless society tracks all monetary activity of Chinese people? I suppose just for a lot of people who may not be familiar with the I suppose a far smaller percentage of transactions in China are done with actual cash compared to, say, the United States. A lot more of it's done kind of through electronic payment systems, payment with your phone, and all that sort of stuff. But it also allows for more tracking. Is that right?
So American companies,
and that's you can just look at the bottom question. There are two questions, just the bottom question. Yeah.
Okay. The American American companies, they really earn a lot of money in Chinese market, and they want to continue their profit in China. So yeah, but if I understand the question correctly, they want.
The main part is, how does the actual way your average Chinese person buys a meal for takeout, orders a movie online, just the fact that so much of it is done through electronic payments as opposed to any form of just cash, that it's much easier for the government to track what people are doing.
Yeah. So almost every Chinese has app like WeChat, Weixin, and the Weixin is not like a app like a WhatsApp or Twitter. It's a super app. People make online payment. It's like order food and taxi, everything. And it's very easy for the company is controlled by the Communist Party in terms of all the data, and so we chat together with other social media like Weibo, is like a Chinese version of Twitter, and all other like TikTok, all other apps are tools for the Communist Party to monitor people, to track, and especially those troublemakers, lawyers and petitioners and activists, and that's part of the high-tech totalitarianism.
And then just those questions there, if we could see them, do you mind answering them relatively quickly? I know they may not be easy questions, but if you don't mind trying. Thanks.
Yeah, this morning I watched a program on the computer from Carnegie, and it was two scholars presented programs, one from Australia, another from Indonesia. And they talked about how China, through Huawei and some of the other technologies, were absolutely dominating the market in third world countries, and how that American and other Western technologies, Japan, etc., had fallen so far behind through everywhere from all over Africa and Southeast Asia. And I'm just wondering how this technical dominance that seems to be happening from Chinese corporations is going to affect the internal aspect of China. What kind of differences you see, and whether you'll see this kind of program. They talked about whether American influence could basically constrain it, and their problem, or their considerations was, at this point in time, China is so far ahead that it would be almost impossible for other technologies to constrain this. Just wondered what your position is, and whether how that might internally change China.
Well, thank you. Huawei is registered legally as a private company. It's not a state-owned enterprise, but if you know the relation between Chinese government and Chinese business, you'll see it's not that simple. It's controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. That company, and not only that, the Huawei and many other companies, Alibaba, Tencent, and all those companies have close connection with Chinese military, Chinese government. So it's not just a regular technology company. It's like a threat to national security, data security, and privacy. So we've seen some countries made policies to block or sanction Huawei. So that's right direction, and like a TikTok and WeChat, so many such companies and social media, and and there's a censorship, there's a propaganda. So it's not just a regular business. So first, it's important to realize how these companies cooperate with Chinese government in exporting its propaganda, disinformation, and sometimes it assists Chinese government in seeking intelligence or threatening national security and their personal privacy, we have seen some new policies. We see some effort made by Australia, Canada, India, the United States, but I think it's far from enough.
There's another last question over here.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. It's just hard to see from here. Sorry, the lights. Okay.
Can
Do you
you?
mind just if we do this in fairly shorter answers?
Sure. This will be
Okay, and then
relatively
the
quick.
last question over here.
So, going back to our main point, human rights in China, it seems like there are, after hearing what you told us, there are lots of wrongdoings, and it seems like you want to see a major reformance in China, a major change. What would it be if you have a message to an average American citizen? What is it that we can do, if there is any, to support that?
Thank you very much. Over the years, we have received, when I was in China, we received a lot of support from the American government, the Congress, the international human rights organizations, and they have done a lot. But for American citizens, the people living in free countries, they can support the human rights in China by the daily actions. You can spread the information of Chinese political prisoners, on social media. If you have spread the word, if you push forward the media coverage of those stories, and if you join the campaigns, there are a lot of campaigns organized by Chinese human rights activists, Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, and that's very important. And of course, you can write to your representatives in local and federal Congress, and that will impact the China policy. So you can do a lot to support human rights activists in China, Tibet, Hong Kong, and East Turkestan.
Last question.
To relate or not, but you said that the Chinese average citizen is fairly brainwashed by the Chinese party, and that they see their territory extending through the entire South China Sea as a birthright. Does it go past that shore in the eyes of the Communist Party and the minds of the people that they've spoken to?
Are you asking, I think a lot of people have seen the maps where the Communist Party has claimed virtually all of the South China Sea, hundreds and hundreds of miles from typically what's considered mainland China. Do you think, I think maybe you're asking, is there thoughts that maybe they even more so have belief they have a claim even beyond that, maybe into parts of Southeast Asia and beyond?
So they.
How big is their territory in their minds?
I believe that before I went to university, I deeply believe that we see the maps every day, and it's the South China, the whole South China 9-line. So the whole South China Sea is is part of China as Shanghai is part of China. And so we never, I never thought about it's so close to Vietnam, Philippines, like that. And Taiwan. So and many maybe most Chinese people have that belief that Taiwan is part of China, and China will sooner or later take back Taiwan, and if anyone occupy Taiwan or a small island in South China Sea, and these people are willing to be soldiers. But beyond that, it's related to the Chinese long history, and there's it's not about the concrete territory. It's about the mentality of many Chinese people, including the communist officials, and they have their own the Tianxia order, and China for a long time was the center of the world, the center of the whole world. And recently I'm reading a book written by Wang Feiling, so the China Order, and this is their vision to see the whole world. And as Xi Jinping raised the China dream, or the great rejuvenation of Chinese nation, like that, and they have become more and more aggressive, and they want to not only challenge the United States, but also want to dominate the international order if they are able to, and they have tried their best to export the so-called the China model. They export the totalitarian, authoritarian model to many other countries, Africa, Latin America, and One Belt, One Road. So it's not just an economic project. It has its political agenda. So we have to encounter that ambition by the Communist Party. They really don't want to see the expansion of freedom and democracy.
On behalf of the World Affairs Council and HSI Texas and the members of both organizations, Dr. Teng, I want to say again, for all of us, it's truly an honor and a privilege. And I want to thank you for your years of truly courageous and selfless service, and really dedicating your entire adult life to doing what you can to better the lives of your fellow Chinese citizens. And I want to thank you so much for coming, and we definitely look forward to staying in touch, and all the best with your next chapter.
Thank you very much.